Wait, you're sleeping there? While my brother and his wife are on a trip, I'm house-sitting with my niece at my brother's house. As we discuss tomorrow's plans with excitement, my niece starts to open the closet door, seemingly ready for bed. Surprised, I watch her slide into the closet without hesitation. As I hurriedly grasp her arm, she looks up at me with a puzzled expression. I'm Lily. I am a 24-year-old housewife. I have a brother who is 5 years older than me. Having lost our parents, we've always been supportive of each other due to our close sibling bond. This hasn't changed even after we both got married. We still maintain a family-oriented relationship. While my husband's parents are nice, they live quite far away. A distance that requires a plane ride. Due to the long distance, something you'd typically need to fly to cover, it's not so easy to ask for his help. My brother and his wife had a shotgun wedding, but ever since his wife had a fallout with her parents, they've become estranged. Without any neighbors to turn to, we found comfort and ease in our mutually supportive relationship. Furthermore, both our families have been blessed with daughters. For years after my niece was born, my daughter Alice came along, and the girls grew up as close as real sisters. As time went by, my niece Emily was about to turn 10 when John told me about their upcoming 10th wedding anniversary trip. Would you mind looking after Emily while we're away? It's just an overnight trip nearby. We thought it would be nice to have some alone time as a couple. Seeing my brother happily blush as he spoke, I readily agreed with a hearty sure, no problem. We roughly planned out the schedule, and when I asked when I should come to pick up Emily, my brother shook his head. Apparently, my brother was concerned about leaving the house unoccupied due to security reasons and wanted me to stay over instead. Although I teased him for being a worrywart, I eventually agreed to his request, leaving my own daughter, who was still uneasy about sleepovers, in the care of my husband. Days passed uneventfully until the day of their anniversary trip, and as planned, I went to stay at my brother's house. As Emily, looking a bit nervous, watched her parents leave, I took her hand to reassure her. Now, it was just the two of us for the house sitting. Initially, I planned to bring my daughter along and just have my husband pick her up at bedtime. However, Emily was unusually adamant about not inviting her to the house, so I gave up on that plan. Of course, we had visited as a family before, but she must have had a reason for not wanting her here today. It's a shame we can't invite Alice over to play, but we really can't, Emily said with a hint of loneliness. Then how about we go to my house after breakfast tomorrow? I promised, which made her eyes light up. Having prepared some more challenging games and puzzles that even adults would enjoy, in consideration of Emily who usually played along with my daughter. I asked Emily what she'd like to play as we spread them out. We spent time playing games and preparing dinner together. However, Emily seemed nervous the entire time, sticking close to me and frequently glancing around the room. At first, I thought she was just lonely or anxious without her parents around, but her behavior remained unchanged even after several hours. When I asked if something was bothering her. But no matter how many times I asked, she just kept saying, "I'm fine. Nothing's wrong," without telling me what was bothering her. Emily's behavior was as if she was on guard against something invisible. I would come to understand its meaning only when bedtime arrived. Changing into her pajamas, Emily said with a smile, "Let's go to bed early today, and start out for Aunt Lily's house in the morning," as she opened the closet door. Inside was a set of bedding, prepared at some unknown time. As I was struggling to grasp the meaning of this, Emily quickly laid down on the mattress and attempted to close the closet door, saying, "Good night." "Wait, Emily, you're sleeping in there?" I blurted out, somewhat louder than I intended. Emily replied with a serious face. "Yes, but it's okay. I'll leave it slightly open. If anything happens, I'll wake up right away." I tried to hide my confusion as I suggested, "Why don't we sleep together tonight?" After a few tries, Emily finally agreed and reluctantly got into my bed. She asked if it was okay to keep the bedding in the closet as her hiding spot, and even though it deepened the mystery for me, I naturally agreed. I then cheerfully asked, "Why do you need a hiding place?" After she made me promise not to laugh, she whispered her answer. "The monster is coming." If that were all there was to her story, I would have thought it endearing in the way children are. However, the story that followed was enough to make me believe in the existence of the monster. Emily shivered and clung to my arm. The monster is very scary and clever. That's why it only comes when Daddy is not here. Mommy says I can't leave the closet until she has driven the monster away. She always cries while she's driving it away. I tried to help her once, but it was too scary when it pounded on the closet door. Hugging the trembling Emily, I let out a sigh inside. This monster was probably real. It probably wasn't a ploy to get a night owl kid into bed. I was caught off guard by my sister-in-law's affair, and I didn't know what to do. If the monster was her lover, it wouldn't come to this house when she wasn't here. Still, Emily believes the monster comes on the days when her father isn't home. The evidence was that today, when my brother wasn't around, she kept asking not to invite my daughter over, and never left my side, always keeping an eye on the windows and the front door. Thinking of sweet Emily and my brother who trusts his wife made me angry at my sister-in-law, but I wanted to reassure Emily more than anything else. I squeezed her hand and smiled at her. It's okay because Aunt Lily is here today. The monster is smart, right? So, it might get scared and not come in because it sees a stranger. Also, your mom who's always targeted by the monster is with your dad today, so the monster can't approach her. Still not knowing the true identity of the monster, Emily's face remained clouded with anxiety, and as time passed, she began to fear the monster's imminent arrival. I managed to calm her down as she suggested hiding in the closet together by telling her she could talk to me about anything that bothered her about the monster. I hoped that by addressing each of her concerns one by one, Emily would eventually feel sleepy. However, after hearing another fact from Emily, I couldn't sit still and ended up rushing out of the house with her still in her pajamas. I quickly drove back home, explained the situation to my husband, and then he headed to my brother's house. I had my husband and his friends stay over there. Around 10 p.m. that day, when my husband and his friends had headed over to my brother's house, I received a call from my brother, who was on vacation, asking about Emily's condition. Did Emily go to bed? Forget about your husband and daughter and get some rest yourself. Make sure to lock the doors, okay? Good night. After asking about Emily, my brother's final words were to ensure I locked up and got some sleep. I was sternly told not to leave the house, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. After hanging up, I looked at Emily, who was sound asleep with my daughter, and pledged to drive the monster away. The next morning my husband, who had stayed overnight at my brother's house, came back. My body trembled with fear and anger as he told me what happened last night. Relieved that my decision from yesterday had been the right one, I spent the rest of the day at home with Emily and my family, waiting for my brother and his wife to come pick her up. When my brother saw us, he was quick to question why Emily and I had left the house during the night. Why didn't you guys stay at the other house? I told you repeatedly not to leave our home. What were you thinking, going back to your own place after agreeing not to? My brother's strong protest that I had broken my promise was met with a surge of discomfort. I coolly asked him how he knew we weren't home while he was on vacation. My brother then responded, "I've given Emily a smartphone with a GPS function." His eyes were evasive as he answered. If that were true, then he wouldn't have insisted so persistently on the phone last night for us not to leave the house. It would have been easy for my brother to verify through the GPS that we weren't at his house. I suppressed the urge to confront my brother immediately and continue the conversation quietly, so the kids in the other room wouldn't hear. By the way, late last night 2 unfamiliar men showed up at your place. Who were they? Why would they come to a house that should only have Emily and me in the middle of the night? Intruders came? I'm glad you're safe. My brother's voice was trembling. But it wasn't out of fear for the intruders or relief that his daughter was unharmed. His gaze darted around as if carefully selecting his words. Hey, about those guys. I pressed my brother further, demanding to know who the suspicious men were. But my sister-in-law cut me off. Perhaps to prevent more questioning, she loudly called Emily over, insisting they leave. As Emily, who had been playing in the other room, timidly showed her face, her mother forcefully took her hand. Suddenly, my brother also changed his demeanor, saying, "I'm not forgiving you for this, but we're leaving for today." He started pushing Emily towards the door. My brother and his wife forcefully tried to take Emily, who clearly did not want to leave, back home with them. "What? We're not done talking yet." I tried to stop them, but they just ignored me, not even bothering to look back. Emily, resisting her parents, reached out towards me. I quickly pulled her towards me, sheltering her behind my back. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" My sister-in-law raised her voice in surprise, letting go of Emily's hand, but I kept Emily behind me, away from my brother and his wife. They spat aggressive words at us and rushed over, fueled by anger. My husband and I were determined not to let them take Emily and managed to force them out of the room. At the front door, waiting police officers swiftly apprehended my brother and his wife. The police tried to calm the disoriented couple, who were clearly not expecting this turn of events. Understanding their predicament, my brother argued, "If you don't give us back our daughter, then you should be the ones getting detained." My sister-in-law added, "They took our daughter from home and locked her up here. Please save Emily right away." "You shouldn't be holding me back. I won't run or hide, so let me go," my brother shouted. Emily and my daughter, who had noticed the commotion and come out, were talking behind me, looking surprised. My daughter innocently remarked, "She doesn't seem locked up at all." I'm not sure whether my brother heard her or not, but he turned to Emily and commanded her to come to him in a strong tone. Yet, the severity of her father's demeanor scared her, and she refused to leave my side. My sister-in-law stood silently by the police officer, just watching my brother, not even trying to call Emily over. My brother, irate that things weren't going his way, was yelling in the entrance, completely restrained by the police officer. Seeing this, my husband pushed his smartphone in front of my brother's face. Noticing this, I told Emily and my daughter to wait once more in the other room and shut the door so they wouldn't hear the audio. After confirming this, my husband started playing a video he had recorded at my brother's house the night before, without uttering a word. Upon seeing it, the faces of my brother and his wife immediately turned pale. The video started with a key slowly turning in the lock of the house. It seemed they'd used a spare key. Two men quietly entered the room. The men, appearing in high spirits, greeted each other, mentioning my brother's name, didn't know we had company. "Hey, how much did you pay?" "He told me it was a 30% discount 'cause she's his sister." One of them smirked, looking over at my husband and his friends. When my husband's friend gave a vague response, avoiding the question, one of the men boasted that because they were good friends with my brother and his wife, they got an even bigger discount, even going as far as mentioning a specific amount. They continued, "We're lucky we get to play with the kids today." The profile of the man who laughed was so grotesque, it would be an insult to demons to call him one. I couldn't see the screen, but the audio alone was enough to make my skin crawl. Afterwards, my husband's friend started barraging the men with questions, asking if they often came to this house, if they always came as a pair. Sensing something was off, the men asked where Emily and I were. Seeing my husband's enraged expression as he responded, "They're not here," it seemed they finally realized the gravity of the situation. Realizing they weren't among friends here, the men quickly fled. Until the very end, they were either unaware of my husband's recording or deliberately didn't mention it. My brother, supposed to be their close acquaintance, seemed to have discovered the existence of the video for the first time and was shaking. My brother, now deathly pale, frantically stated, "I didn't know anything, I've been framed." I had thought until watching this video that my brother was uninvolved and that my sister-in-law was the mastermind behind everything. However, the video contained clear evidence of my brother offering up Emily and me. His ignorance won't convince anyone. My brother was taken away by the police, and my sister-in-law feigned ignorance of the situation. But the police officer, who had already heard Emily's testimony, asked her to accompany him because he had many questions to ask her. Thus, they ended up in custody together. At a later date, the police interrogated my brother and his wife, who ended up confessing everything and were subsequently arrested. It turns out my sister-in-law would lure men into their home on the nights my brother worked late shifts and receive money from them. Realizing there was a demand for children among certain groups, she carefully exploited Emily in a way that wouldn't run afoul of the law. Emily, who knew nothing and was trying to help her bullied mother, was photographed posing as she was told. The pictures were merely innocent photos of a child. Yet, my sister-in-law would go out of her way to take these simple photos with a disposable camera, develop them, and show them to her customers, inducing a bidding war, as though at an auction. What's more, she only lent out the photos, she never sold them. As despicable as this was, it should have had nothing to do with my husband and me. When my brother became aware of his wife's business, he didn't scold her or protect his daughter. Instead, unbelievably, he started gathering men to become customers. More staff meant more revenue. With such a simple mindset, my brother decided to involve me in the business. Of course, I would never agree to it if he simply asked me. So, my brother thought to force me to work and continued to threaten me by taking photos of the scene. And so, they carefully chose a day when the neighbors wouldn't be around and locked Emily and me in their house. They exchanged the spare key to their home for a large sum of money and went out of town for an overnight trip, just to prove they weren't involved. What my brother and his wife didn't expect was that Emily, who had always obeyed my sister-in-law without question, regretted telling me about the monsters to protect me. Emily didn't understand most of what was happening in the house, but she did understand that the monsters were targeting them. By telling me, she brought the hellish situation at my brother's house to light. That night, when I learned about Emily's predicament, I asked my husband to capture the image of these so-called monsters. They carelessly leaked a lot of information, so the police acted promptly when we reported it. We also reported it to Child Protective Services, making sure to protect Emily. When we told the police officer about my brother and his wife coming to our house, they were able to secure Emily from them. My brother and his wife were arrested on serious charges such as child welfare law violations and violations of laws preventing child exploitation. Despite being first-time offenders, they could not avoid imprisonment. The photos of a child they had been taking over several years were considered highly malicious. Once an image is leaked on the internet, it can never be erased. I was shocked when the police told me this, but fortunately, my sister-in-law had not digitized or sold Emily's photos, and they were securely stored, preventing any leakage. I don't understand how my brother, who had been kind and reliable to me, could have become such a terrible person. We had been helping each other out as usual until then. The fact that I didn't notice this distortion scares me. Anyway, I want them to face what they've done. Following the arrest of my brother and his wife, the so-called monsters were also brought in for questioning by the police. They apparently argued their innocence, claiming that because their plans had not been successful, they weren't guilty. However, it seems that the discovery of someone else's child's photographs at their residence, and their involvement in other criminal acts confessed by my brother and his wife during their interrogations, led to them also being arrested on multiple charges. After we took care of the monsters lurking in our lives, we went to the Child Protective Services to inquire about Emily's situation. Her parents were arrested, leaving her without anyone to care for her. In fact, they were unfit to be guardians in the first place, so custody of Emily was taken away from my brother and his wife. That said, neither my brother nor I have any living parents, and my sister-in-law's family is completely estranged. We learned that if no one from my sister-in-law's family would agree to take her in, Emily would be taken in by foster parents. After talking it over with my husband, we decided to adopt Emily. To me, Emily is not only someone I'm greatly indebted to, but also a girl I've grown to love as my own daughter. The thought of leaving her was simply unbearable. Luckily, my husband agreed and we saw this as an opportunity to move to my in-laws' town. Our daughter, who loves her grandparents and has always wanted an older sister, is overjoyed. She's been excitedly looking forward to the weekend, when she could see her grandparents more often, and now her wish of having Emily, who she adores, as her big sister came true. And as for Emily, who finally got out of the clutches of her abusive parents, she's adapting incredibly well to her new environment as an older sister. It's amazing how resilient kids can be. she's beginning to lead a happy and peaceful life. Huh? Charles is on a business trip too. I've heard Charles is out of town for work. I haven't heard anything about his trip getting shorter. The lights have been on every night, though. Neighbor gave a puzzled look. Things got a bit awkward between the two of us, but the neighbor just went back to their house. I wonder what's going on. Charles was supposed to be on a business trip for a week, and it doesn't make sense for him to be home without letting me know. As I thought about it, I came up with a possible explanation. So, I called Linda, my mother-in-law, and made a suggestion. Can you and your husband come over to our house secretly? Charles's birthday is coming up soon, and I want to surprise him. Linda replied. Of course, honey. A surprise sounds so thrilling. We'll head over shortly, just hang tight for us. With that, she hung up. All right. Things are about to get interesting. I grinned. My name's Jennifer, and I'm turning 33 this year. Charles and I have been married for 3 years. We met at the company we used to work at. We don't have kids yet. I only switched jobs a year ago. I'm still getting the hang of my job, and I'm worried about inconveniencing the company if I were to take maternity leave right away. So, I want to get more comfortable with my work first before thinking about having kids. I changed jobs to further develop my skills. Charles and I were in the same sales department, him being my senior. I often sought advice from Charles whenever I couldn't meet my sales targets. He even accompanied me on major client appointments. We grew closer as I consulted with him regularly. And soon we were dining out and hanging out together, building a close relationship. Then one day, during one of our usual dinner outings, Charles suddenly proposed. I'm in love with you, Jennifer. I want you to marry me. Having trusted him through our work together, I replied. I'd be happy to. The joy on Charles's face when I accepted was unforgettable. He thanked me repeatedly, saying, Thank you. I'm gonna make you the happiest woman alive. Seeing Charles so elated, I felt sure of the happiness that lay ahead. We lived not too far from Charles's parents, who reside in the next town over. It's a comfortable distance for me, better than living with them, at least. At the beginning of our marriage, they weren't too thrilled about my job. Because they believed that my dedication to work might delay us starting a family. Jennifer, don't you want kids soon? Maybe you don't have to work that hard, you know. Every time I met her, my mother-in-law would repeat this like it was her catchphrase. My father-in-law, perhaps eager for a grandchild, would always tell me, I want to hold my grandchild. Charles is my only child, so you're our only hope, Jennifer. My father-in-law had just retired from a regular office job, and my mother-in-law was a stay-at-home mom. Charles was an only child, making them a family of 3. Perhaps because Charles is their only child, it seems they expect me to have several children. I think they might also want an heir. Charles wants a lot of kids, right? I've overheard my father-in-law asking Charles this question numerous times, and my mother-in-law would say things like, I'll be there to help raise the kids with Jennifer. You can rely on us anytime. Charles probably got used to his parents' comments. He would only respond with, Thanks. Well, kids are a blessing, and we can't tell when they'll come to us. He never really defended me, so there were times I honestly didn't want to visit my in-laws. But they aren't bad people. I made some homemade roast beef for you. I remember you said you liked it. I hope you like it. My mother-in-law would often say, bringing me some of her dishes. I admire my mother-in-law for being able to make homemade roast beef, and I genuinely appreciate the delicious food. My father-in-law has his good sides too. Sometimes he would quietly hand me some pocket money, saying, It's not much. I'm not sure if he does the same for Charles. It's nice that he'd give it to me, his daughter-in-law. With such in-laws, I've managed to maintain a relationship of neither being too close nor too distant. However, the pressure for a grandchild from them isn't my only concern. My work has its own set of challenges. Especially with business trip. The company I switched to requires a lot of business trips. At my previous job, female employees had some considerations, so long trips were limited. But it's different now. Perhaps because it's a sales job for construction materials. There are frequent trips. With all products developed in-house, clients are spread across the country, from New York to California. Regularly hopping from one place to another is the norm for proposal sales. Initially, I knew nothing about construction materials, so it was tough. Moreover, most of the business clients are men. At times, some would be dismissive, almost implying, "I can't discuss this with a woman." Being brushed off or not taken seriously was a regular occurrence. However, when a company accepts my proposal, the satisfaction is immense. And when I visit a completed building using our products, it's an inspiring experience that boosts my motivation. But, as I felt more accomplished in my job, the number of trips increased proportionally. Lately, I've been traveling once or twice a month, ranging from short 2-day trips to ones lasting over a week. Some months, I'm barely home due to business trips. It seems my in-laws are not happy with this. One day, when visiting my in-laws with Charles, my mother-in-law sternly questioned, "Jennifer, what do you think of Charles? Don't you want to stay home and cook for him?" She must have been worried about her son. Especially since she's been a stay-at-home mom her entire life, she probably assumed that it's only natural for a woman to prioritize the household. After that, I got an hour-long lecture from her. During this, my father-in-law just sat there, looking extremely awkward, like he'd become part of the furniture. Maybe Charles felt sorry for me getting grilled by his mom, because he jumped in to defend me. "Jennifer's been working hard, you know. I'm often away on business trips, so please, don't be so hard on her." And Charles gave me a reassuring pat on my shoulder. My mother-in-law seemed surprised, probably not expecting Charles to stick up for me. Maybe she thought she was conveying her son's feelings to me. "Well, if Charles says so," she remarked, sounding resigned. Seeing her act like this made me think that she really must love and worry about her son deeply. That was an eventful day. I had spent most of that week on a business trip in Chicago. Initially, I had planned for a week, but my proposal to the client went smoother than anticipated, so I was able to come home 2 days earlier. I was thrilled about this unexpected change, but when I had informed Charles about my business trip schedule, he said, "My trip's gonna be the exact same time as yours. So don't worry, just do your best, Jennifer." So, Charles shouldn't be home yet. Although I was glad to be back early, I felt a tad lonely thinking I'd be alone at home. However, as I approached the house, something felt off. To my surprise, I noticed the lights were on, particularly in our bedroom on the second floor. As I stood there, dumbfounded, neighbor called out to me, "Jennifer! I'm so sorry about yesterday." Neighbor is a young woman in her early 20s. She is living with her husband and baby. "Yesterday? What happened?" I was caught off guard and must have looked puzzled. Neither Charles nor I were home yesterday, so there's no reason for her to apologize. Then the neighbor started explaining. "For the past few days, my baby has been crying a lot during the night. You must have heard it, right? I was worried that we might have disturbed your sleep." She looked genuinely apologetic and concerned. However, I thought there must be some misunderstanding. Huh? Charles is on a trip. I had heard from Charles that he was away. And he hadn't mentioned anything about returning early. Really? The lights were on every night. I think they've been on every night for the past week. Sometimes, when my baby is crying at night, I carry him out to the balcony to soothe him. Our balcony faces your house directly, so I thought maybe you haven't been on business trips lately. Neighbor looked surprised. It created an awkward atmosphere between us, but then neighbor was called by her child from inside her house and went straight back home. What's going on? I was increasingly puzzled. Charles was supposed to be on a business trip this week. It's impossible for him to be home without notifying me. The reason I think so is that Charles can't cook at all. In the past, I would prepare a lot of meals in advance and freeze them. If I didn't get the food ready to just microwave, Charles wouldn't be able to eat. Suddenly, I wondered if he might have gone back to his parents' place. I decided to call Linda, my mother-in-law, to check. "Hey Linda, has Charles been coming over for dinner all this week?" I asked as soon as she picked up the phone. "No, he hasn't been here," Linda replied with a surprised tone. "That's strange. If he didn't go back home, what was he doing for dinner?" As I thought about it, one reason came to mind. Then, I made a suggestion to Linda on the phone. "Can you and your husband secretly come over? Charles's birthday is coming up soon, and I want to surprise him." Linda replied. "Of course, honey. A surprise sounds so thrilling. We'll head over shortly, just hang tight for us." I knew she wouldn't hesitate to come. She's the kind of person who doesn't think too deeply about things. "Alright, this is gonna be exciting." I grinned slightly. "Jennifer, we are here." About 15 minutes later, my mother-in-law came, bringing along my father-in-law. They both must really love their adorable son, Charles. Perhaps it's because I mentioned a surprise for Charles beforehand, but they had such excited expressions on their faces. "What's the surprise gonna be?" My father-in-law asked me with a slightly playful tone. "Charles thinks I'm still on a business trip and haven't come home yet. He must be feeling lonely by himself right now. So, I thought we could all sneak into the house and give Charles a little surprise. I was thinking of ordering everyone's favorite Chinese dim sum for dinner later. How does that sound?" I shared the plan I had thought of before my in-laws arrived. Of course, I have a different motive, and there's a hidden agenda to the plan I shared with them. However, it doesn't seem like my in-laws suspect my surprise plan at all. "Sounds fun! Everyone loves Chinese, so let's order the premium stuff. It'll be on me," my father-in-law said with a sudden smile. "Should we also get some wine later? Charles will surely be surprised." My mother-in-law seemed genuinely pleased. Seeing my in-laws so genuinely joyful made me feel a bit guilty. Thinking about what might happen next, which could steal away their smiles, made me feel a bit uneasy. However, I managed to suppress those feelings and, without showing any emotion on my face, said, "Shall we go then? From here on, it's a surprise, so please be quiet, both of you." I then quietly unlocked the door and we all entered. There was no light in the entrance, but the outside brightness made things somewhat visible. That's when I noticed. As I had suspected, a pair of red high heels that weren't mine, neatly placed side by side. At that moment, my face went blank, but my in-laws didn't notice. When I glanced at their faces, they still seemed thrilled. They were probably imagining Charles's surprised face, unable to hide their smiles. We then quietly made our way up the stairs towards the bedroom on the second floor. Light was seeping from the bedroom, and there was a faint presence of someone inside. As we got closer, we could hear voices. I pretty much guessed what was happening, so I wasn't shocked. However, my in-laws were probably puzzled to hear voices coming from a room where Charles was supposed to be alone. They both looked a bit bewildered. Without a word, I went up the rest of the stairs and opened the bedroom door. As expected, Charles was in the bedroom. "Jennifer! Why are you here?" Charles said, looking surprised. "I finished my business trip early and came home." "What's going on here?" I spoke to Charles. Next to Charles was a familiar-looking woman. "Well..." Charles seemed at a loss for words. "That figures." The woman with Charles was Linda, who worked at the same company as Charles as a receptionist. I used to work at the same company as Charles before I switched jobs, so I recognized Linda's face. She's younger than me and had just started right out of college. Her hair was brown and beautifully curled. Her nails and clothes were on point, showing she put effort into her appearance. However, even when I was at our old company, Linda had a reputation. And not in a good way. With her looks, it's no surprise Linda is a receptionist. She's very cute. She probably doesn't struggle to find boyfriends. But Linda has a bit of a manipulative side. Rumors had it that she'd frequently switch between men she was dating. A good friend of mine, who secretly dated someone from our company, lamented how Linda managed to snatch him away at some point. That time, I had to listen to my colleague vent till the last train, and all I could do was console her. After hearing such things multiple times, I couldn't help but see Linda as an enemy among women. As I was lost in those thoughts, Linda spoke.
"Isn't that Jennifer?" "What a coincidence," she said cheerily.
She seemed utterly unaware of doing anything wrong.
"Linda, do you realize what you're doing? Charles is my husband, you know."
I asked Linda, trying to keep my cool. Though I was a tad irritated, I did my best to hide it. Linda chuckled and said,
"Of course I knew. I originally worked at the same company with you, and I tend to want things even more when they belong to someone else."
Saying this, she teased me. Twirling her hair with her fingers, she looked at me with a mischievous grin. Indeed, Linda was just as wild as the rumors suggested. She didn't seem fazed by the situation at all. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying the drama. I wonder if Charles couldn't stand this atmosphere. Charles hesitated and began to speak to me. "Sorry, Jennifer, you've been traveling a lot lately. I've been kinda lonely, and you know, eating microwaved meals alone just isn't the same. Then Linda said she'd cook for me and take care of me, so I just..." When I glanced at Charles, his cheeks were slightly flushed. He must be gradually falling for Linda. I let out a heavy sigh and said, "So, that's the situation. What should we do, mother-in-law, father-in-law?" Addressing my in-laws, who were visibly shocked by the unexpected turn of events. My in-laws were standing near the stairs, out of Charles and Linda's view. My father-in-law stood with his mouth wide open in shock. "Why are Mom and Dad here?" Charles hurriedly approached and was bewildered when he saw his parents near the stairs.
"You mean these are Charles's parents? Why are they suddenly here?"
Even Linda seemed taken aback. She probably hadn't expected not only me but also his parents to be present.
"Jennifer planned a surprise for Charles, right? So why are you doing this?"
My mother-in-law was in tears over Charles's indiscretion. This was just too much for her.
"What the hell? You don't care about Jennifer and you're cheating on her."
My father-in-law shouted at Charles, trembling with rage. My in-laws have always been close, and I've never seen them fight. This situation was probably unimaginable for them. While I was thinking about this, Charles started complaining to me.
"Jennifer, why'd you call Mom and Dad? It's totally uncool to drag my parents into this."
Charles glared at me. It seems that I'm to blame for everything because I called his parents. Linda sided with Charles and said,
"That's so low of you, Jennifer."
My in-laws seemed quite irritated by Charles and Linda's remarks. After all, it's clear to anyone that the one cheating is in the wrong. My father-in-law was so angry, his face was so red.
"Aren't the worst ones Charles and Linda?" "Not just Charles, but it's totally unreasonable for him to cheat in the house I live in too," I said, looking straight into their eyes.
I countered firmly.
"Just because you were on a business trip, huh? It's my house too, you know. I did nothing wrong."
Charles replied defiantly. Linda nodded in agreement.
"My house, you say? Do you even know who owns this house?"
I asked Charles. In a smug manner, Charles responded,
"Isn't it ours? It's clearly property shared between the two of us."
I sighed deeply.
"No, it's in my name. Remember when you couldn't get approved for the mortgage because you had too many credit card debts? That's why it had to be in my name. Plus, you haven't paid your share of the mortgage. Ever since we moved in, I've been the one paying for everything."
Neither of Charles's parents knew about this. They both looked quite shocked. They probably assumed Charles was taking care of the payments. Quick to defend himself, Charles said,
"All right, maybe you're right about the house. But I've been covering car maintenance and groceries, haven't I? You've had it easier financially because of that."
I was taken aback by Charles's argument. Charles mentioned about car maintenance, but he is the only person uses car. Today he used his car for commuting, but I usually take the train. Most of the time, I travel for work, using planes and trains, so I don't really feel the need for a car. The train station is within walking distance, so I have no issues getting around.
So, you are the only one using the car, right? And about the groceries, I usually do the shopping at the grocery store. Are you saying the groceries are for Linda? That has nothing to do with me, does it?
Charles's face turned a shade redder, seemingly having hit a nerve. I was utterly disappointed, and it seemed his parents felt the same. They were both at a loss for words.
Anyway, a divorce between you and I is what's best, right? I'll be seeking monetary compensation for my mental suffering from both you and Linda. Also, since this house is mine, could you both leave right now?
The mention of divorce changed the color of Charles's face. Hearing about my mental suffering, Linda went pale.
Jen, you're joking about the divorce and suing us, right? I wouldn't be able to make it on my own,
Charles said, going pale. Considering how Charles has been spending his money, his reaction was not surprising.
You've hardly contributed to our household finances since we got married. I bet you spent it on having fun with Linda or on whatever you felt like,
I pointed out. Charles fell silent. Linda seemed taken aback by Charles's behavior. Then my father-in-law, who had been silent until now, spoke up.
Jennifer, we're truly sorry. We had no idea Charles had been causing you so much trouble.
My father-in-law seemed genuinely remorseful. And then my mother-in-law addressed me.
The reason Jennifer has been working so hard is because Charles wasn't contributing to the household. We truly don't know what to say. We're so sorry.
My mother-in-law was on the verge of tears. Charles's negligence must have been a shock to them. Speaking to Charles's parents, I said, I've tried to make it work because I used to love Charles. But after such a betrayal, I've come to dislike him. I'm sorry to both of you, but I'll be seeking a divorce. I conveyed this to my in-laws, who had taken care of me in so many ways. My father-in-law responded,
Of course. We'll make sure Charles takes responsibility for this. We truly apologize for everything.
He sincerely apologized to me and was getting teary eyes. Although I told him he doesn't need to apologize to me, he kept his silence and looked apologetic for a while. Then, my in-laws took Charles and Linda and left. I remained in the house, feeling a mix of sadness and regret, and cried. Later on, the divorce went through smoothly. Through the lawyer my father-in-law introduced me to, I demanded settlement from Charles and Linda. I was able to collect $10,000 from each of them. Being able to collect this amount was also thanks to my father-in-law. He apparently gave them both a long lecture when he took them home that day.
You betrayed Jennifer with what you all did. You all better show some real sincerity,
he said. But neither Charles nor Linda had the money. Both of them liked to splurge on themselves. So, for the time being, my father-in-law fronted the $10,000 for each of them, and it seems Charles and Linda will repay him later. I'm nothing but grateful to my father-in-law. As for what happened to Charles and Linda afterward, turns out both of them left their jobs. Rumors about Charles and Linda had been circulating in the company for a while. And when my divorce with Charles was finalized, their relationship came to light. Given the circumstances, the company felt the need to take some action. Their solution? Transfer him to a remote branch. Charles was moved to a tiny branch office in a rural area with just a handful of employees. There was absolutely nothing fun around that branch. Apparently, he couldn't handle it, so he resisted and decided he was gonna quit. Of course, his resignation was accepted right away. Linda, being a contract employee, wasn't offered a contract renewal. There had always been negative talk about her in the company, and this incident seemed to be the last straw. An old colleague, who I was close with at my previous company, filled me in on all this. I thought to myself, they got what they deserved. It is what it is. Around the time Charles left his job, he called my cell phone multiple times. At first, I ignored him, but he was so persistent that I finally picked up. What do you want now? When I answered, Charles said in a desperate voice.
Finally! Please, you gotta help me out!
From what Charles shared, he'd been job hunting since he left his previous job but hadn't been able to secure a new position. He'd been living with his parents, so he was getting by. However, one day, his father-in-law told him to sell his car to repay a debt of $10,000. After selling the car and giving the $10,000 to his father-in-law, he was told, "You're no longer needed here. Go wherever you want and live your life." It seemed Charles had been essentially disowned.
I tried asking Linda, but she's in a similar situation with no money. The only person I can rely on is you. Can you please help me out?
He pleaded.
Why would I help someone who did what you did?
We're strangers now. I firmly told Charles off. Yet, Charles wouldn't give up.
Actually, I'm right outside your house now. Can you let me in?
Perhaps because he was desperate, Charles wouldn't back down. So, I calmly told him.
Someone else is living in that house now, you know? I've moved away and live somewhere completely different.
In fact, I'd rented that house to someone else. The rent was covering the mortgage, so it's breaking even for now.
Well,
Charles must have been really shocked, as his voice trailed off towards the end.
I don't think we'll ever see each other again, so, goodbye.
I told Charles that and hung up the phone without waiting for a response. Then, I immediately blocked Charles's number. 3 years have passed since then. I'm as busy as ever. However, one major thing has changed. That's having a child. Turns out, I met someone new after that and got remarried, giving birth to a healthy baby boy. I love my husband, he's really sweet, but oh boy, my child is just adorable. Right now, I'm on parental leave, taking care of my child every day. Of course, I absolutely love the hustle and bustle of work. That's never gonna change. But the cuteness of my own child? That's unbeatable. Even though every day is super hectic, I'm looking forward to spending fun times with my family of 3. As I arrived at the next scenic spot in my rental car, the phone rang with a call from my mother-in-law, as if she had been watching the whole time. It was my mother-in-law. I gave my husband, David, a knowing look and answered.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's up?
Her voice was frantic on the other end.
Get away from David right now. Grab your bag with your clothes and head to the bus stop by the cliffs.
Mrs. Johnson? What are you talking about?
David's planning to attack you. He's got a gun hidden in the car.
So, that was the game she was playing.
I can't believe David would.
Okay, I'll leave right away. My response might have sounded a bit flat, but it seemed to have convinced her. She hung up immediately. My name's Emily Johnson, a 29-year-old office worker. I got married to David last year, but because of the COVID pandemic, we had only registered a marriage. Now that the pandemic's effects have waned, we've been able to travel. So, we're planning our belated honeymoon. My company was understanding and gave us time off for our honeymoon even though it's been a while since our marriage. We chose a national park, eager to take lots of pictures. I'm into landscape photography. David's hobby is video editing. We've even discussed starting a YouTube channel for landscape videos. We've been living a quiet but happy newlywed life. However, there's been one concern: David's mom, Mrs. Johnson. She has always been overly fond of David, her son. Since David and I decided to get married, she seemed to have it out for me at every turn. Her subtle harassments during our meetings are a frequent occurrence. And the worst part is that she does it behind David's back. If I get praised or say something at a family gathering, she'd subtly put me down.
Did you make this stew, Emily? It's an unusual recipe for around here, but it's tasty. It's really delicious. Can you share the stew recipe? If it's simple, I'd like to make it at home.
Did you like it?
I'm glad. I'll write down the recipe for you right away. It's good, Emily. But maybe learn some traditional recipes from around here too? It'll earn you more praises.
That's how it usually goes. She's not praising my unique stew, she's suggesting I stick to the local recipes and not stand out. In fact, after the relatives left and it was just me and Mrs. Johnson doing the dishes, it was a barrage of sarcasm.
Always wanting to stand out, making such a salty stew. Planning on giving our family high blood pressure or something? Scary woman. I tasted it. Did you find it too salty? I'll go lighter on the salt next time. I don't even want to eat your salty stew anymore. Make something more traditional next time.
But then, when David comes around, her demeanor completely changes.
Emily, Aunt Susan said thanks for the stew recipe. Everyone really seemed to love your dish. Really? That's great. What would you like to eat tomorrow, David? Emily and I will prepare it together.
With a beaming smile, she'd interrupt our conversation, shifting the topic. It's so blatant that it's hard to even get angry about. It's become a bit of a joke for us afterward. The hilarious part is David's already caught on to her dual-faced behavior and subtle digs. Mrs. Johnson thinks her son doesn't notice, and takes every chance to berate me when he's not around. However, my husband David has already caught on, and even secretly records or films her when it gets too bad. David has always resented his mother's overbearing love, which is really just over-interference. Apparently, it's even crushed his dreams for the future. So, when we got married, it was David, not me, who refused to live with her. Despite the happy occasion, it seems like Mrs. Johnson thinks I was the one who manipulated him. Her excessive love for her son blinds her to everything around her. I worry she'll do something foolish one of these days. On another note, we've finally decided on the details for our belated honeymoon. Taking our hobbies into consideration, we decided on a trip around scenic locations within the country. I'm excitedly preparing cameras and other equipment. David is also getting a smartphone without a SIM card to take videos. We've packed a traveling bag with clothing and toiletries. We'll be able to see canyons and waterfalls on this trip. I want to take beautiful pictures, so we need to check the weather forecast too. You're right. Landscapes shrouded in mist and clouds are mysterious and beautiful, but I really hope it's sunny. We laughed together as we continued our preparations. But even at a time like this, Mrs. Johnson interferes.
A phone call. It's Mrs. Johnson as expected. Hello.
I answered the phone in front of David and quickly switched it to speakerphone.
Hello, Emily? Are you really planning on traveling with David? You've been married for over a year, and now you're going on a honeymoon. What are you thinking?
It seems she wants to stop me from traveling with my husband. The best response to this is to flaunt the trip.
Of course. We finally don't have any restrictions. David's company and mine have approved the leave for our honeymoon, and we're going to enjoy ourselves to the fullest.
Mrs. Johnson fell for my bait.
What do you mean enjoy yourselves? It's probably just a cheap inn and a miserable trip. I feel sorry for David.
Mrs. Johnson's words caused David to frown in silence. This trip was something David had arranged himself without relying on a travel agency. I looked at David's face and changed my tone.
Oh, no, it's not a cheap inn at all. David arranged everything. We're staying at a super luxury hotel with an amazing view. Of course, the food is 5-star too. And yet, it's all at a very affordable price.
I purposely spoke sweetly to provoke Mrs. Johnson. I'm always being picked on, and this time she was disparaging the trip that David prepared. I wouldn't feel satisfied without getting back at her a little.
A super luxury hotel? Why are you going with David? Let me go on that trip. David would want to show his filial piety to me.
It seems she couldn't keep quiet after hearing about the super luxury hotel. Now she's saying she wants to go on the trip herself. No mother would but in on a honeymoon like this.
It's not gonna happen. Taking over your son and daughter-in-law's long-awaited honeymoon is just uncouth. We'll be sure to buy you a souvenir. Goodbye.
Imagining Mrs. Johnson's frustrated face, I hung up the phone. I laughed spitefully, and David was holding his head in front of me after I hung up.
Emily, I'm sorry about my mom. I can't believe she tried to take over our honeymoon. Well, she loves her son so much, she probably just wanted to say something. It's not something to worry about.
I smiled at David, but I also felt a twinge of anxiety. I had beaten her at her own game with all the resentment I had built up, but I might have failed. What if the angry Mrs. Johnson became obsessed with our honeymoon and started harassing us? This worry of mine would later prove to be true. From then until the departure of the trip, there was silence from Mrs. Johnson, not even a phone call. I had expected her to complain to David about me, but that didn't happen either. Her silence was unnerving, but we went on our honeymoon as planned. David's choice of scenic locations went off without a hitch, and I was completely satisfied. The super luxury hotel I had boasted about to Mrs. Johnson was top-notch in every way: the view, the amenities, the food, everything. We even had the hotel staff take a picture of us enjoying dinner as a couple.
Oh, I'm so full. David, thank you so much for arranging all this.
After dinner, I collapsed on the bed in the hotel room.
The bed's so soft and comfy too.
Watching me happily roll around in bed, my husband David exclaimed with joy.
I'm glad you like it. Once you've rested your stomach, how about we go to the spa? In the meantime, I'll check the videos and photos we took today. The spa? How wonderful.
David, who had been opening his laptop while admiring me enjoying the plush bed, suddenly raised his voice after a while.
What? What's going on here?
Feeling an unusual sense in David's voice, I got out of bed and peered into his computer. We had rented a car to get around today. At every scenic spot we visited, we had parked the rental car and taken videos and photos, and the rental car could be seen in the background here and there. In itself, that wasn't a problem, but there were a few instances where a suspicious person, who appeared to be a small-framed woman, was lurking around the rental car. We couldn't see the face of the suspicious person, but we felt she was a petite woman. The suspicious person was occasionally opening the car door. Oh, here, we didn't lock the car because we were only there for a short time, David muttered, pointing at the screen. I recognized the hat the suspicious person was wearing.
Hey, this hat, doesn't Mrs. Johnson have one like this?
Yes, Mrs. Johnson has a similar hat. David's face turned pale at my words.
That's right, this is my mother's hat.
David and I stared intently at the computer screen. The suspicious person, who looked like Mrs. Johnson, was putting something black into the rental car. It looked like she was opening the traveling bag that had been left in the rental car. Then, after a while, the suspicious person left without taking anything. Was something put into the traveling bag? I hurriedly dumped out it. It felt strangely heavy. I hadn't noticed the difference in weight since the hotel bellman had carried it when we arrived at the hotel. It was a bag with clothing and toiletries, no valuables. Nothing seemed to be stolen. And then, something unbelievable rolled out from the bottom of the bag. David and I were stunned by what had come out.
What's this? You're kidding.
The next morning, we left the hotel with exhausted faces. We had been run ragged dealing with the incredible thing that had come out of the bag the previous day. When we arrived at the next scenic spot in the rental car, the phone rang with almost perfect timing. It was from Mrs. Johnson. I signaled to David, who was on the phone, to answer it.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson? What's going on?
Mrs. Johnson's voice on the other end of the phone sounded quite frantic.
Get away from my son right now. Grab the bag with the change of clothes and head to the Cape's bus stop.
Wait, how does she know there's a bus stop near the Cape where we're vacationing? And how does she know the details of our luggage, like the bag with the change of clothes? Since she called at the perfect timing, she's probably hiding and watching somewhere. It was a call full of puzzling moments, but I deliberately asked Mrs. Johnson for a reason.
Mrs. Johnson? What are you talking about? David is planning to attack you. He's hiding a gun in the car.
I see, so that's the scenario. I already knew everything, but I pretended to go along with Mrs. Johnson's leading.
That can't be, David attacking me? Okay, I understand. I'll get away right now.
Although my response was a bit wooden, I seemed to have successfully fooled Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson hung up immediately. I signaled to David, who was driving, and headed for the bus stop with the traveling bag. Of course, I didn't forget to pretend to be scared. And then I called the police. About 5 minutes later, I arrived at the Cape's bus stop, and a detective in an unmarked police car approached me.
Well, it turned out just like you said yesterday. I never thought you'd really call it in.
The detective looked troubled.
I'm truly sorry for involving you in this farce. I think David should be catching Mrs. Johnson by now, so please come with me.
I headed back to the rental car, and the detective followed me in his unmarked car. From the parking lot where we parked the rental car, I could hear Mrs. Johnson's voice.
Hey, David? How did you know where I was?
It seemed that Mrs. Johnson had never dreamed that her wicked scheme would be exposed in advance. She was caught by my husband, hiding in the shadows of a gazebo in the parking lot.
Not today. I will not forgive you today.
Mrs. Johnson was frightened by her husband's demon-like expression, but she was even more astonished when she saw me returning with the detective. In my hand was a traveling bag, just as Mrs. Johnson had planned. Upon seeing it, Mrs. Johnson started to scream.
Officer, arrest that woman right away. She's hiding a gun in that bag. She's trying to kill my son with it.
Mrs. Johnson shouted that and smirked at me. A triumphant look on her face. I silently stood before Mrs. Johnson and dumped the contents of the bag. Out of respect for the men's eyes, the underwear was placed in a small bag so that it could not be seen. However, the object Mrs. Johnson was after was nowhere to be found.
What? Why isn't the gun there? I put it there yesterday, it should be there. Is this the gun you are looking for?
The detective showed Mrs. Johnson a photo. It was a picture of a hunting rifle placed in a plastic bag. Upon seeing the photograph the detective presented, Mrs. Johnson's face turned pale.
That hunting rifle, it belonged to my late father-in-law, didn't it? Honestly, how did you manage to open the gun safe? I thought my heart would stop when I found it yesterday. I called the police right away and handed it over.
At mine and my husband's voices, Mrs. Johnson ground her teeth and looked down.
Oh, since it was in Emily's bag, it's Emily's fault. I have nothing to do with it.
Mrs. Johnson started yelling in desperation. My husband and I sighed deeply. But then, the detective approached Mrs. Johnson with a big smile on his face.
Yeah, because it was in Emily's bag, we had to ask her about it. We spent hours questioning her yesterday, even though it was supposed to be a vacation. So, how did you know the hunting rifle was in Emily's bag?
Although the detective's face was smiling, his voice was low. It's no wonder he's angry. After all, the hunting rifle was taken out illegally, even though it was unloaded.
But, I saw Emily put it in her bag.
Mrs. Johnson, unable to look the detective in the face, desperately made excuses.
Oh, so you saw Emily's travel preparations. But you and Emily's family are separated, aren't you?
I chimed in with an obvious response.
Of course we're separated, and we haven't let her into our house for a year.
At that remark, Mrs. Johnson yelled back.
Don't speak out of turn.
The detective pressed Mrs. Johnson further.
Oh my, were you spying on Emily's house? If so, that's a misdemeanor, and I'm gonna have to ask you to come to the station with us.
Upon hearing the detective's line, straight out of a police drama, Mrs. Johnson panicked.
I wasn't spying. I put that gun in there. So you can't take me involuntarily.
Ah, she spilled the beans all by herself. Well, I had already said it earlier when I turned the bag inside out. The detective, who had been smiling until now, became serious.
Yes, a confession. You'll be coming with us voluntarily for violating the gun law.
At the detective's words, Mrs. Johnson opened her mouth in shock.
What? Why? I said I wasn't spying, didn't I?
Mrs. Johnson's objection was met with her son's fury.
It's only natural, Mom. You don't have a hunting license, and you took Dad's gun without permission. If the father-in-law, who had a hunting license, carried it legally for the prescribed purpose, there would be no problem. But you don't have a hunting license, so taking it out of the gun safe is out of bounds.
It seemed that Mrs. Johnson knew nothing about gun laws or handling. Even though the live ammunition was stored separately and not loaded into the gun itself, it's a wonder she managed to bring it this far without an accident. Yet Mrs. Johnson still resisted.
But when it was found at the hotel, it must have been in that woman's bag. That woman stole it from my house. It's not my fault.
At the unsightly attitude of Mrs. Johnson, her son raised his voice.
Yesterday, I caught the moment on video when Mom put a gun in our rental car. Naturally, I showed it to the police.
David's words made Mrs. Johnson's knees buckle.
What? How did you find out?
Frustration and tears welling up in her eyes, I explained in his stead.
David was filming yesterday, and he caught the parking lot in the shot. We didn't notice it at the time, but when we were reviewing the video at the hotel, we saw it.
Mrs. Johnson could no longer argue with my explanation.
Now, Mrs. Kate Johnson, we'd like you to accompany us to the station on suspicion of violating gun control laws.
The detective prompted Mrs. Johnson, who was in a state of shock, to get up. To Mrs. Johnson, David exclaimed,
"Why would you do something like this? Just because you don't like Emily? I've had enough. I'm cutting ties with you, Mom."
At David's words, Mrs. Johnson suddenly began to scream and thrash about.
Why? Why is that woman better than me? David, are you abandoning your mom?
The detective forced the screaming Mrs. Johnson into the unmarked patrol car.
You might not want to make too much of a fuss. When I called the house yesterday to check the gun's serial number, your son's grandmother, I guess, an elderly woman, was furious. Eek!
At the detective's words, Mrs. Johnson immediately calmed down. The grandmother in question is David's grandmother. Although elderly, she's still in good health, with no signs of dementia. She's practically the head of the Johnson household. Mrs. Johnson is in a state of complete submission to her. Even though she's the head of the household, she's not an unreasonable person towards others. Whenever I visit the in-laws, she's always so happy to see me, affectionately calling me Emily dear. She's a kind person. Though strict with Mrs. Johnson about household chores, she took care of her own room and private bathroom. It must have been quite something to make her so angry. As I muttered under my breath, the detective informed me.
Apparently, since your father-in-law's death, your husband's grandmother has been keeping the hunting rifle as a keepsake. But the box with the keepsake in it was ransacked the other day. Upon learning that this led to the recent commotion, she was incredibly furious.
The detective exaggerated a shiver. I see, Mrs. Johnson must have ransacked her room to get the key. It's not hard to imagine her anger at having her son's keepsake disturbed. Afterwards, David spoke to the detective.
I'm not gonna pick up Mom at the police station after this.
At David's words, Mrs. Johnson's face changed to one of despair. The detective laughed and waved as he explained.
Yeah, David and Emily, you continue your vacation. Your grandmother insists on it, and her representative is on the way here.
With that, the detective left with Mrs. Johnson. David heaved a big sigh. Emily, I'm really sorry. Our vacation turned into this.
It's okay, it ended without incident. Let's just enjoy the trip, shall we?
I said, and David looked relieved. Then he quietly told me.
I'm relieved that it's not Grandma coming, but her representative. When Grandma gets really mad, she's terrifying. If she had come this time, she might have torn down the police station with her loud yelling.
After that, we were able to enjoy our vacation, taking lots of lovely photos and videos and making good memories. Mrs. Johnson was not arrested but was sent to court for violating gun control laws. Fined or imprisoned or both, she's now anxiously awaiting the trial's outcome. After we returned from our trip, my husband's grandmother apologized for Mrs. Johnson's behavior. She blamed herself for leaving her son's keepsake hunting rifle locked in the house, leading to all this trouble, and apologized in tears. We decided to have the local police dispose of the hunting rifle. When handing over the rifle at the station, I asked to take a picture of it for her, so she could at least keep a photograph as a memento. My husband's grandmother, who had cried and apologized to me and David, was ruthless with Mrs. Johnson. According to a relative who went to pick her up, she lectured Mrs. Johnson in a voice that echoed throughout the neighborhood for over 30 minutes.
Oh, so your grandma really does get that angry. That's why Mom always obeyed Grandma completely. Now the whole neighborhood knows about Mom's wrongdoing.
Yes, thanks to his grandma's lecture, the incident became widely known, and Mrs. Johnson could no longer walk the streets. After learning that David had severed ties with her, his grandmother obtained permission from the police station and prosecutor's office and sent Mrs. Johnson to a farm run by a relative, located in a basin-like area in the remote mountains in Nebraska. Even if she wanted to return here, it would take about 3 hours by car. Working herself to exhaustion on the farm, escaping would surely be impossible. After a while, it was discovered that I was pregnant. My husband, his grandmother, and the relatives were all thrilled. His grandmother was already caught up in great-grandchild fever and began to strengthen her legs. She seems to be planning to compete with my husband to take the baby for walks in the stroller. To make sure she doesn't drop the great-grandchild when holding it, she's also started working on her upper body strength. It's good to see her, who was quite downcast because of Mrs. Johnson's fuss, getting her spirits back. Today, my husband and I are getting all the baby gear together.
If it's with your grandma, I'd like to live together. She's really happy about it, and it seems like she'll live a long time after the baby is born. Taking care of the baby with grandma, we're gonna manage somehow, huh? Well, if she's gonna live longer, I'll be happy too, and I'll talk to grandma about it.
I picked up the camera. When the baby is born, I'm gonna take lots of pictures of the baby, my husband, his grandma, and family photos as well. With such thoughts, I was rubbing my belly.
With this, I can be with her.
In my fading consciousness, these were the words I heard from John. The joy in his voice made me bite my lip in frustration, questioning whether I would become a mere puppet to his desires. John descended the stairs, carelessly stepping over me, whom he had just hauled down, and started humming a tune as he headed to the living room. He was probably dialing his mistress, paying no mind to me at all. I bit back my regret and passed out right there. When I woke up, I found myself in the hospital room. Looking around the room with a pouring headache, I saw John and an unfamiliar woman who was sobbing uncontrollably. I instantly understood that John had brought his mistress to my bedside. Swearing revenge, I gritted my teeth, propped myself up, and confronted the two of them. My name is Michelle Thompson. I am 38 years old. I am a housewife leading an ordinary life with my husband John, who enjoys fishing. I first started to feel strange unease about our perfectly ordinary life about 6 months ago. John, who is usually indifferent to my calls or messages, started to become inseparable from his phone. I suspected something was off about John's behavior, but otherwise, everything seemed perfectly normal. Even when I subtly probed, he would shyly reply that he had become hooked on the fishing game app. Although my doubts persisted, his change didn't inconvenience me in any way, so I tried not to worry too much about it.
By the way, I'm going fishing this weekend.
Again? That's the 4th time this month.
Bob invited me. It's okay, right?
Even when John started going fishing more frequently with his fishing buddy Bob, I still tried to trust him. John, who usually only went out once or twice a month, started going out every weekend since last month. I was unable to say anything to John, who seemed to enjoy preparing his fishing gear, and thought it was inappropriate to interfere with his hobby, so I stopped prying further. He works hard on weekdays, so he should have his fun on weekends, right? With that thought, I saw John off every weekend and began my house chores. One day, amidst our usual routine, a phone call came in that turned my discomfort into certainty.
Hello? Michelle? Isn't John off today? Is he at home?
Huh? John? Bob, who was supposed to be going fishing with John, was asking me whether John was at home. I didn't immediately grasp the situation and couldn't respond right away.
Michelle, is something wrong?
John said he was going fishing with you today and left.
What? What do you mean?
Even though Bob seemed genuinely surprised, I had no answer for him. Bob said that he had called to share some of his good catch because he had a good day fishing. Upon checking, Bob confirmed that he was not with John. John had not made any plans to go fishing with Bob, In fact, Bob had invited John many times recently, but John had often turned him down.
I thought it was usual for him not to answer his phone, but why is he lying?
I'll call him from my side too. Remembering John's lie, I was reminded of the unease I had been trying to ignore. It was impossible for him not to notice Bob's call when he was always holding his phone. I decided to call John and ended the call with Bob. With a prayerful heart, I dialed John's number. Surprisingly, John picked up the call right away.
Hello?
Oh, John, what are you doing right now?
What do you mean, what? I told you yesterday that I'm going fishing with Bob.
John responded in a matter-of-fact tone. If I hadn't just spoken to Bob, I would have been easily deceived. A chill ran through me as I considered whether John had been lying so easily all this time. Furious with John, who seemed to think he could deceive me with such a sloppy lie, I continued the conversation. I actually need to speak with Bob. Could you put him on the phone?
Nah, can't do that right now. Bob's got a big one on his fishing line.
John responded with a laugh, as if Bob was actually there. Even more, he kept on with his one-man show, cheering on the absent Bob with phrases like,
Go, Bob.
and
This is a big one.
I could only sigh in exasperation at the sound of John's ridiculous voice. Well then, can you pass on a message to Bob?
Yeah, sure. What should I tell him?
Bob just called asking if you were at home. I told him you're with him, apparently.
Huh?
John, who had been talking non-stop, suddenly fell silent at my words. No, this is a mistake, he stuttered, and then abruptly hung up. Staring at the end call screen, I was certain that John was cheating. I was surprisingly calm as I wondered what John would say when he came home. After sending a message to Bob explaining the situation, I waited for John's return. John, who came home much earlier than usual, just apologized to me without any explanation. I decided not to pursue the matter further if he told me everything honestly. But all John did was apologize for lying and insisted he went fishing alone.
I'm really sorry. Please forgive me.
Just tell me everything honestly. We'll talk after that.
Like I said, I went fishing alone. This is the truth.
No matter how much I accused him of cheating, John stubbornly kept denying it. John insisted that if he said he went alone, he would be suspected of cheating. Even when I argued that lying was much more suspicious, all John did was apologize for being faultless.
I was alone, so there's no witness. It's inevitable that I'll be suspected.
So, just tell me everything truthfully.
Everything I've said is the truth. Trust me.
Even if he said that, John had just lied to me without the slightest hint of remorse on the phone. There's no way I could believe him. I told John to show me his phone. However, whether he had deleted all his exchanges with the other person or not, I couldn't find any incriminating evidence.
See? I didn't do anything wrong.
I was fed up with John, who looked smug as if he were admonishing me for doubting him. Even when confronted directly, it seemed John believed he could casually dodge the issue and escape. Disgusted by his insincere apology, I handed back his phone and gave up. John, who showed no sign of remorse, was bound to slip up again somewhere. With this in mind, I decided to keep a close eye on John, enlisting Bob's help. John kept his phone with him as always, saying,
I've nothing to hide.
and didn't decrease his weekend outings. Despite what had happened, didn't he even think about trying to regain my trust? On the contrary, John seemed to be more confident than ever. Just when I was going cold towards John, he suggested we go out for dinner on my birthday. What on earth is going on?
Well, I've upset Michelle, and I thought I should do something to show my sincerity.
Swallowing my word of, what now? I stared intently at John. I wish he would just tell the truth if he didn't want to upset me, but it seemed unlikely to get through to a cheerful John. Despite suspecting he was trying to appease me, I decided to go along with John's invitation. Do you really think you can win me over with just a meal? Sighing, I realized I trusted John less than I thought. Without minding my attitude, John rushed me.
I've made a reservation, so get ready quickly.
Reluctantly going upstairs to prepare, I found John's smartphone, which he usually wouldn't let out of his sight. Had he let his guard down? Or did he think he could withstand scrutiny now? The carelessly placed device was gleaming, signaling a notification. It's John's fault for not telling the truth, so I decided without hesitation to check the notification. What? You're betraying me after all. A notification from an unknown name that wasn't there when I last saw his smartphone. The most recent message in the familiar exchange read, "I can't wait to see you." She even had the nerve to send a heart emoji. Now, John has no chance of making excuses. Without being particularly surprised, I silently traced back the messages. While taking pictures with my smartphone, I checked for any incriminating exchanges. Even a complaint about having to delete the exchange because of my suspicion was written, and I had a bitter smile at the wealth of evidence. John had even messaged,
"I wanted to go out to dinner with you, rather than my wife." Hey! What are you doing looking at my smartphone without permission?
At that moment, a flustered John ran up and yelled at me. Seeing me with his smartphone, he seemed pale. Sighing, I returned John's smartphone to him.
Why would you do such a thing?
If you hadn't lied, this wouldn't have happened.
So you couldn't trust me that much?
You have the audacity to lie to me like that, and still have the nerve to say such things? I retaliated against John, who was blaming me with an irritated attitude. There was no reason to be blamed for his wrongdoing in the first place. The reason he always carried his smartphone with him was probably because he didn't want it to be seen. Seeing John suddenly become defiant when caught, I had reached the end of my patience. Did you think it was safe once you fooled me? What sincerity?
So, this is you.
Me? What? You still want to blame me at this point? Ridiculous. When I read aloud the message I had just seen, John glared at me with a dissatisfied face and continued to remain silent. I no longer felt like going out for a meal with John and threw the bag I had been preparing, turned my back on John, and was about to return to the first floor.
Hey, where are you going?
I can't possibly go out to eat with someone like you. Why don't you go with the person in the message? You prefer her over your wife, don't you? I said to John, despising him. Both of us were heated and didn't seem capable of having a proper conversation. I was thinking of taking some time off when it happened. I felt a thud in my body, and my foot slipped off the stairs. Before I could even gasp, I realized that the staircase was right in front of my face. When I realized that John had pushed me down the stairs, I was lying on the floor, unable to move a single finger. My vision was shaking, and as I felt my consciousness fading, I heard John's voice.
It's your fault. You're the one who did something arbitrary.
Even in such a situation, the persistent John was still blurting out such things to protect himself. If I didn't call an ambulance myself, I would probably be abandoned by John. Out of such fear, I desperately clung to a smartphone in my pocket.
Well, this is good. Now I can be with her forever.
So, I was in your way that much. No sooner had John descended the stairs than he began humming a tune as he walked towards the living room, avoiding me as if I were an inconvenience. Presumably, he was preparing to go to a restaurant he had mentioned in his reservation. Without a care for me, he was likely inviting the person who had just messaged him. I passed out at the moment I heard John dialing someone's phone number. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital room. I looked around the room slowly, clutching my throbbing head, only to see John and a crying unfamiliar woman. For some reason, John looked even more disheveled than I was, and there was a slap mark on his face. Though I assumed she was the woman John was having an affair with, the unfamiliar woman continued crying without end. When they noticed I had wakened, they approached me with a worried look. "Michelle, you've come around! Thank goodness!" "Who are you?" "I am, The woman who introduced herself as Lisa began to reveal her identity, wiping her tear-filled red eyes with a handkerchief. As I had expected, she appeared to be the woman John was having an affair with, and she started apologizing in a sobbing voice for a terrible thing she had done, saying, "I'm sorry. When I heard that John had put his wife through such an ordeal, I couldn't stay put, so I came here." "Is that so? So you're the one who called the ambulance?" It seemed that Lisa had hit John hard enough on the cheek to make it red, harshly blaming him for his actions. I had thought for sure that she was the one who had called the ambulance for me, but she shook her head. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Bob, who was said to be the one who had actually called the ambulance, entered the room.
Michelle, how are you feeling?
Yes, I'm fine. I still can't quite take in the situation though.
I guess so, considering what I've heard from these two. Let me explain.
Bob sat down on the chair, giving John a scornful look, and began to explain the details. After John had pushed me down the stairs, he really did go to a restaurant with Lisa that he had invited me to. It seems that Bob arrived at our house just after John had left. In my fading consciousness, I had been clutching my phone, sending Bob an odd message. Bob, noticing this, tried to contact me, but he couldn't get through, so he came to check on me. Then, he became suspicious of the open window with the curtains left open, and when he looked in, he found me lying there. Is that so? Thank you. I'm not sure how to express my gratitude.
Not at all. I'm just glad you're okay.
I thanked Bob. Then, I sighed and turned to John, who had been silent and looking guilty ever since. This man had pushed me down the stairs and then left me there while he went out to eat without a care in the world. As I pulled a face, Lisa began to apologize to me again, crying. I was really shocked to hear about this. I never thought he was this kind of person. So, you think you can be forgiven for having an affair with another woman's husband if you cry and apologize? No, but I didn't mean it like that. I didn't know he was married. At her words, I snorted and said, Oh, really? With a sarcastic laugh. She could apologize all she wanted, but I was absolutely livid when I saw her trying to act as if she had no idea that John was married at this point. You knew he was married, didn't you? No, I swear I didn't. Please believe me. I've seen your messages with John. He's telling you he'd rather go out to dinner with you than with me, his wife, isn't he? Well, about that. Caught off guard by my words, Lisa glanced at John. John had indeed sent her messages referring to me as his wife. Her reaction made it abundantly clear that she was lying. When I called her out on her lie, she fell silent, as if she had nothing to say. The shared habit of effortlessly lying, assuming they wouldn't get caught, was almost a perfect match. I calmly thought to myself how well they suited each other. Well, what do you have to say? He told me he was going to leave you, but he never did get around to filing for divorce. So you thought it would be a good idea to push me down the stairs? I didn't know he was like that. I swear, if I had, I would never done something like this. It doesn't matter who it is. Cheating is unacceptable. What are you even saying? As I rebuked her, Lisa felt silent once more, looking like a child scolded by a parent. Even after all of this, John, who remained silent and refused to discuss anything, led me to propose a divorce.
Divorce? Isn't that going a bit too far?
A bit too far. So that's how you see all of this, huh? John finally opened his mouth, a look of shock on his face as if I'd suddenly started making unreasonable demands. I was disappointed to realize that John had given so little thought to everything that had happened up until now. I couldn't possibly continue to live with someone who had lied to me with such ease, thinking he could deceive me, and who had even pushed me down the stairs. When I made this clear, John seemed quite down, as if he might finally be showing some remorse. If we divorce, you can freely go out to dinner with her, can't you?
I can't defend you, John. I hope you take this as a chance to reflect on your behavior.
Even Bob chided John, who simply nodded in agreement, his shoulders sagging as he murmured,
Alright.
He was just pretending to be obedient, a trick I've seen him pull countless times before. That's why I decided to press on, putting them on the spot. When you first got caught lying, you promised to make amends, yet you kept betraying me with Lisa.
I'm sorry, I truly am. If a divorce will make Michelle feel better, then let's do it.
Do you think it's just going to end there? We're definitely splitting the property as well. When I mentioned about splitting the property, both of them clearly showed their disturbance. They probably thought they could divorce amicably and be together, but that wasn't going to happen. They both pleaded for a chance to discuss things, hoping to appease me, but I knew they were both capable of lying and deceit, and John even had a history of pushing me down the stairs. I couldn't possibly believe them anymore. If you'd confessed when I asked you to tell me the truth, things might have turned out differently, don't you think?
Even if I'd been honest, you would have blamed me anyway, right? Of course I would have. Do you still not realize what you've done? You cheated on Michelle, and both of you lied about it. People lie. It's just a part of life. You can't justify lying to protect yourself at the expense of hurting someone you care about. Don't lump me in with you.
Even after John accepted the divorce, this back and forth continued, ultimately involving even his parents. The sight of John's parents-in-law persistently apologizing on behalf of John, who should be a mature adult by now, still makes my heart ache whenever I recall it. Even as we were on the brink of divorce, it was Bob's words that silenced the ever-complaining John.
John, I beg you, as a friend, don't let me down anymore. Even you're saying that to me now. I hope the day will come when you understand what you've done.
Realizing these words marked Bob's decision to cut ties with him, John was left speechless, his eyes wide in shock. Later on, it seems John remarried Lisa, and they sent a postcard to our house, seemingly to spite me. The message attached was filled with resentment towards me, stating that their life has been made difficult due to the property division settlement I demanded from him. But there's no reason for me to be resented. If he wants to resent something, he should resent his own actions. Disgusted by his childish message that only focused on himself, I threw the postcard into a trash bin. Just as I was thinking about this, John suddenly showed up at my house. From the commotion at the front door, it seems Lisa has been aggressive towards him, and they are not getting along.
Michelle, because of the property division settlement I paid you, Lisa is always blaming me.
The property division is something you're responsible for due to your actions, not because I made an unreasonable demand.
Have you ever thought about how I feel, being stripped of such a large amount of money? Lisa blames me for being poor and even says I might push her down the stairs at every opportunity.
Trying to gain sympathy for his pitiful self and blaming me, John loudly expressed his grievances. But none of what he said could possibly resonate with me. Instead, hearing such things from a person who never considered my feelings, I could only give a bitter smile. Everything he said was his own doing, and I opened the door in disbelief, next to my new lover standing side by side.
Bob, why are you with Michelle? If I leave Michelle alone, bad bugs will come.
Even after the divorce, Bob has been dedicatedly checking up on me. Attracted by his kindness, I decided to start dating him. Seeing Bob, who was angrier than me about John's behavior, John had no choice but to back down and quietly left.
He really doesn't learn, does he?
He should reflect on making his parents apologize, at least. Seeing John, who showed no signs of remorse, Bob and I watched him leave, with a look of disbelief on our faces. They say people become stubborn as they age, but I don't want to become like that.
Well, no matter when he comes, I'll protect you, Michelle.
Thank you, but if you just don't lie to me, that's enough for me. Even though I knew I wasn't at fault, I had been severely depressed because of John, but Bob patiently waited for me. In order to repay his feelings, I decided to look forward again and move on.
A few days after my husband William was promoted to supervisor, Michelle, my mother-in-law, came over to celebrate. I looked around the dining room table, puzzled. I couldn't find the gift I had left there the previous evening. "Hey, do you know where the package I left on the table last night is?" Wearing his casual clothes and back in the living room, William replied with a smug smirk. "That cheap thing you gave me? I threw it out." I stared at him in shock. "It was in a Macy's bag. A custom-made shirt with initials and such. Too outdated for my taste." I responded with a faint smile. "So, you've always felt this way, huh?" For Valentine's Day and birthdays, I'd go all the way to the department store and pick out stylish socks and handkerchiefs for him. But William would accept them with a nonchalant face and wouldn't even thank me. Too bad, that gift wasn't for me. I can't wait to see the storm that's coming. You're gonna pay for all the times you've looked down on me. I am Carol, a 38-year-old housewife. I married William 2 years ago and have been working part-time since our marriage. I met William, who was working in the parent company of my previous job, through our respective bosses, and we started dating. Many of our friends and colleagues were getting married, and I was feeling the pressure, so I was grateful to my boss for introducing us. I was drawn to William's confident and cheerful personality, believing that I can build a wonderful family with him. So, I happily accepted his proposal a year later. But shortly after our wedding, William began showing his arrogant true colors. The first red flag was his grumpy remark right after we returned from our honeymoon. "When are you gonna quit your job?" "What do you mean?" "We can live on my salary, can't we? Just quit your job." I was dumbfounded. It's not like we can rely solely on a husband's salary anymore. We might want kids someday, so I want to save up now. "Well, I'll allow you to work, but switch to part-time." "What if household chores are neglected?" "We're both working, so it's only natural for us to share the chores, right?" With that, William scoffed. "Come on now, you earn less than me and yet you are trying to boss me around. That's ridiculous, right? My mom always kept our house spotless and was entirely devoted to my late dad." "Well, that's expected from a wife, I guess." "Oh, I can take out the trash if you want." It seems that his mother was a stay-at-home wife, and his father was a typical domineering husband. It's a bit much to expect that in this day and age. Arguing about it seemed so silly, so I just sighed and let it go. First, I asked my job to change from a full-time position to a part-time role ending at 3 p.m. After a few conversations, he'll probably understand. That's what I thought, but I was soon crushed by reality. William just wouldn't listen, and his condescending attitude only got worse. The thing that really got to me was his complaints about the food. He can't even prepare breakfast by himself, yet he was so picky. On a day when I was bedridden with a high fever, he came up to me and said, "What's for lunch?" Half asleep, I struggled to open my eyes and whispered with a raspy voice, "Sorry, I can't get up and cook right now. Just whip up something simple, like pasta or something." "Pasta? Simple?" I wanted to argue back, but I didn't have the energy, so I weakly said, "Just have some cup noodles." If you can't even prepare lunch, you're failing as a wife. Take better care of yourself. William didn't show any concern for me and just ate his noodles with a displeased look. Out of options, I warmed up some instant porridge and ate it. But then, a month later, when he caught a cold and was bedridden, he made a fuss, blaming it on me, made me prepare porridge, and expected me to care for him all night. When I mentioned that I had work the next day and couldn't, he got mad, saying, "What a cold wife! Don't you have any sympathy for your sick husband? Can't you see how much pain I'm in? Show some concern." To make matters worse, William had me prepare lunch for him every day, claiming that eating out was too expensive. He never showed any gratitude, just gave me a list of strict rules. I couldn't use leftovers from the previous night's dinner or frozen foods. Everything had to be made fresh. He insisted on a menu of vegetable soup, some egg dishes, fruit, toast, and coffee for breakfast. The fruit and egg dishes had to be different every day. Soon, I found myself constantly thinking about lunch ingredients and meal menus even at work, and my spirits were increasingly dampened. However, getting divorced right after getting married would be unfair to my boss, who had introduced us. I found it hard to vent to my friends and, with my parents having passed away, I had no one to turn to. Alone, I stewed in my own troubles. Despite all this, I continued to try and get along with my husband. For our anniversary, I made William's favorite meatloaf and waited up for him till late in the night. He got called away on an unexpected business trip and didn't return until the next day, but I didn't let that get me down. On Valentine's Day, I bought him a stylish t-shirt from the department store. He didn't react when I gave it to him, and it seems like it just ended up at the bottom of his dresser. However, in early March, I received a text from William during his work break, complete with a photo. My heart nearly stopped when I checked the message. "Gonna head to Amanda's place now. Looking forward to the celebration gift.
Keep those wine glasses I gave you the other day ready.
I was staring in disbelief at my phone when another message came through.
Not gonna let you sleep tonight. Ugh, I don't want to go back to my house.
Was this what they call a misdirected message? This was undeniable proof of his infidelity. Even though I felt our love had long since faded, tears welled up in my eyes from the mix of profound sadness and raging anger, making me feel dizzy. I took a deep breath to calm myself and quickly took a screenshot before William could realize his mistake and delete the message. After that, even watching a comedy show couldn't distract me, so I took a shower to try and clear my head. As I was drying my hair, William came home. I looked into the living room to find him sprawled out on the couch, snoring, his face red. The scent of alcohol mixed with body soap was nauseating. I stumbled and fell near the couch. I noticed a high-end shopping bag. A shirt, maybe? Alongside a ribbon-tied square package, a floral card lay scattered on the floor. I picked them up and returned them to the bag. Then, I took note of the message.
Congrats on your promotion, William. Being a manager at such a big company is impressive. Looking forward to our weekend date in San Francisco.
I smirked. William's company is a small business. I wonder which company he's been claiming to work for. On top of that, after he finally got promoted to supervisor, he's such a show-off, lying about being a manager. I can't believe he'd ask me to return something for his mistress just to save a few bucks on delivery. I glared at William's sleeping face, his mouth slack and drooling. A week after William's promotion, on a public holiday, both William and I had the day off. I intended to sleep in, but ended up waking up earlier than usual. When I got up to use the bathroom, I sensed someone on the first floor. Going down, I found Michelle in the kitchen wearing an apron. Seeing me, Michelle, who was tying twine around chunks of beef and pork, frowned.
Finally awake? For a housewife, you sure sleep in a lot.
Michelle, it's only 5 a.m. While yawning, I saw Michelle preparing the meal and asked, "What brings you here today?" Using her own set of keys to get in. It's obviously to celebrate William's promotion. I heard he's gonna be out of town this weekend, so I moved it to today. I muttered to myself while looking at Michelle's beaming face. It's not a business trip, but rather an overnight rendezvous with his mistress. Still, why is she cooking meat so early in the morning? Is she planning on preparing a feast all day? I had a bad feeling but didn't ask any further questions. I changed into my casual clothes and started doing the laundry. So much for a day off, a nap seems unlikely now. After a while, the delicious smell of roasted meat wafted from the kitchen. I love roast beef and barbecued pork, but I can't imagine eating it this early. Michelle, humming along to a tune, left dishes in the sink and started making a salad. I began preparing breakfast next to her. After a while, Michelle, growing impatient with her son who showed no sign of waking, turned to ask me, "Carol, what time does William usually wake up?" On his days off, he usually sleeps until about 10 a.m. He must be tired from working every day. Well, that's all right. The party is tonight after all. By the way, Carol, you off from work today? I'm off today too. Oh, really? Michelle, with an obviously annoyed look, glanced at me. Even after preparing the meal, she didn't bother cleaning up. She plopped down on the sofa and started watching a TV show as if she was at her own home. After a while, William, who had just woken up, entered the living room. He looked shocked to see Michelle acting as if she owned the place.
Mom, why are you here? Good morning, William. I came over for a surprise promotion party tonight. Being a manager at such a big company, I can boast about it to the neighbors.
Oh, thanks. Looking slightly embarrassed, William gave me a quick glance and headed for the bathroom. I was taken aback to realize that even his parents had been fed false information. Suddenly, I noticed something missing from the dining table. The promotion gift I left out last night is nowhere to be found. Hey, do you know where the gift I left on the table last night is? When I asked William, who had just come back from the bathroom, he gave a mischievous smile.
That cheap thing? I threw it away.
I opened my eyes wide. The one in the Macy's bag? A custom-made shirt with initials? Too tacky. I'd never wear it. I chuckled. So, you've always felt this way. Every anniversary, I would head to the mall and pick out fashionable socks or handkerchiefs for him. But William would always take them for granted and never thanked me. It's a shame. That wasn't a gift from me. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of scene unfolds. You're gonna pay for all the times you've made fun of me. Hearing my stern words, William looked puzzled. You checked the contents? Yeah. That was a gift from your mother. She sent it by courier, and I left it on the table. I messaged you about it last night, didn't you see? William's face stiffened. He quickly grabbed his phone, checked his messages, and went pale. On the sofa, Michelle, who was munching on a cookie, crushed the cookie in her hand and slowly stood up. I told you the other day that I'd just treat you this year, remember? I caught a glimpse of what looked like a really nice shirt. You came home pretty drunk last night, so you didn't really get a good look at it. William's mouth dropped open as he looked at Michelle. Michelle, with a hint of anger, flashed a smile. I even added a handwritten card. William, you just throw away gifts from others without a second thought. Mom's really disappointed. Sorry, I'll pick it up right now. Wait. As William rummaged through the kitchen trash can, Michelle's sharp voice shot at him. I just took it to the dump. William checked the wall clock and was shocked. He had missed the collection time by 30 minutes. The burnable trash had probably been collected already. William rushed to Michelle, got on his knees, and begged for forgiveness. I'm so sorry. I wouldn't have thrown it out if I knew it was from you, Mom. Even if it was from Carol, throwing it away without even using it once? That's really something. Michelle scolded William in a frustrated tone. She came from a generation that valued thriftiness, keeping things like wedding favors. Probably couldn't stand seeing things thrown away so hastily without even using them. William, having thoroughly upset his mother, seemed to shrink in guilt. It's hard for him in moments like this, especially since they usually get along so well. It would be a waste not to take advantage of the situation. With a clearly upset look on her face, Michelle began to pack up. I raised my voice and said to her, Michelle, there's nothing we can do about it. It seems he was really busy last night. For about a year now, he suddenly started having lots of overtime and business trips. Even though his salary didn't change, when I sarcastically mentioned it, William glanced at me with a side eye, breaking out in a cold sweat. Does she know I'm having an affair? No, I can't be sure yet. If I can keep it hidden, I'm gonna do just that. Seemingly torn inside, William managed a half smile and began to awkwardly explain. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I'm busier at work, but the pay remains the same. It feels like I'm working for some shady company. I get so frustrated. Heck, I barely have time to check my cell. By the way, Michelle, William sent me this message the other day. I was so shocked, I cried. I showed Michelle my phone. It was a message William had mistakenly sent to me a few days ago. Michelle's eyes widened. William, are you having an affair? Staring at the phone Michelle was holding out, William's eyes bulged. What the heck is this? That's my line. You mistakenly sent your lovey-dovey exchange with her to me. The wine glasses, those are the ones you had me order online, right? Yes, they are. I can't believe it. Making your wife buy a gift for your mistress? What were you thinking? You're not just making a fool out of me, but her as well. Give me a break. The shipping cost was $2.50. As long as she doesn't find out, it's fine. I paid you back for the glasses, what's your problem? Acting like it was the most natural thing in the world, William became defiant. So, that was the reason. What a penny-pinching man. You're stingy, yet you want to have an affair. If you were gonna cheat just 2 years into our marriage, why did you even marry me? Challenged with this question, William smirked. I chose you 'cause you seemed like you'd just follow my lead, didn't matter who it was. What the heck, that's terrible.
But once we got married, I just got bored with plain ol' you real quick. Women gotta be young and pretty, you know.
I was so taken aback by William's audacity that I couldn't find words.
You've been cheating for over 6 months now, haven't ya? It started when a coworker invited you to that strip club. Suddenly, you had all these business trips and worked weekends and overtime. I knew something was off. You're so naive. I just told you that and you believed me. I threw out all the lunches you made for my weekend shifts. Eating your lunch on dates with Amanda would have been rude.
I was speechless. Despite him saying he liked homemade, I woke up at 5 a.m. even on weekends to make elaborate lunches for him, and now to hear he'd just thrown them away. Michelle looked on, silently crossing her arms and frowning deeply. Furious, I pressed William even further.
So, your weekend business trip to San Francisco was really a secret getaway, wasn't it? Don't bother playing dumb. I asked the detective agency to investigate.
I took out documents and photos from a large envelope and spread them out on the table. There they were, clear as day, photos of him arm in arm with a woman at tourist spots, kissing, even going into a hotel.
You didn't think you'd get photographed, did you?
He grimaced for a moment but quickly shrugged it off. Boldly, he searched his phone for a photo to show to me and Michelle.
Yeah, she's a stripper, a whole decade younger. Look, Mom. Ain't she cute?
Michelle glared fiercely at the gleeful William. He recoiled as Michelle slapped the phone from his hand, and he stared, mouth agape.
What the hell, Mom? You cracked the screen. Shut up!
I was absolutely stunned to see Michelle yelling at William with such a furious expression. Michelle, with a furious look I had never seen before, yelled at William. It looked like she was about to lunge at him. Michelle trembled and scolded William in a shrill voice.
William, aren't you ashamed of having an affair with a young woman? I thought you were the one person who wouldn't do such a thing. But Mom, you don't like Carol, right? Don't get mad just because I've got another woman on the side.
Michelle was furious with William's flippant attitude.
This is different. Don't you remember? Your father had an affair with a woman from a bar, and they even had a child. That caused a huge scandal. Do you know how much I cried back then?
William touched his mouth with a regretful expression. Knowing this story from a previous conversation with William, I thought Michelle might take my side. My hunch was right, and to seal the deal, I pulled out William's paycheck from the drawer and spread it in front of William and Michelle.
Come on, Michelle, don't be too hard on him. William's been working hard and look how much he's earning.
The moment I put it on the table, William snatched it up and stuffed his paycheck into his pants pocket. Michelle looked puzzled.
Oh, William, isn't the pay a bit low for working at the headquarters? No, it's Kanata Industries.
Michelle blinked.
What's that?
I've never heard of that company.
Wait a minute, when did you switch jobs?
Avoiding Michelle's gaze, William tried to explain.
I quit the company I joined right after college within a month. The pay was good, but the boss was scary. He got super mad when I overslept like 3 times. It's fine, right?
I'm working properly.
Yes, Michelle, he even got promoted to section chief.
With a smile, I spilled the beans, and William glared at me.
Hey, don't say unnecessary things. Weren't you a department manager?
Well, I'll become one eventually. Michelle exploded with anger at William's casual brushing off, who was scratching his head and laughing.
Enough is enough!
She shouted, pounding the table.
What's the matter, Mom?
It's not worth getting angry over.
You, always having affairs, lying. You don't seem to be remorseful at all. What are you planning to do in the future, William?
I'm not planning anything in particular. William, fluttering his eyelids, spoke to me with a smirk.
Carol, you're not gonna divorce me over a mere affair, right? Of course, I'm gonna keep seeing Amanda. I'll make sure to give you the money. You wouldn't be able to survive without me, right?
He's way too selfish. I was beyond angry with William's words, just completely flabbergasted. It looked like Michelle felt the same, left speechless.
If you don't want a divorce, turn a blind eye to my affairs. And keep taking care of me like you always have. After all, I'm the one providing for you. Got it?
With his arms crossed, William smugly leaned back. I sighed deeply. I can't live with you anymore. Let's get a divorce. I can do just fine without you. I spread out my paycheck on the kitchen table that I had prepared. I also showed my bank app. Michelle peeked in from the side.
Oh, you earn more than William, don't you?
William turned pale.
No way, that can't be right. I had you switch to part-time so you'd earn less than me.
Staring at the notification in disbelief, William's voice trembled.
What's this $2,000 transfer? Are you into some shady business?
I started some computer work from home when I had free time. I'm finally earning well now. With my part-time job added, I earn more than you in a month. I smiled coldly at William.
You can't just spend our shared money on your mistress. You've spent around $10,000, haven't you? Just let it go. Consider it payback for everything I've done for you.
William looked away, arrogantly dismissing the concern.
It's ridiculous to make a fuss over one affair. And to complain about spending a little money is petty. I mean, if you earn more than me, you should be the one working. I'll quit my job. You handle both work and housework. Serve me better, like Mom did for Dad when he was alive.
Laughing heartily, Michelle gave William a cold glare. I can't deal with you anymore, William. Let's cut ties as a family.
Wait, Mom, why?
Do you think I served your dad out of love? I'm done with you. Whether you want to get a divorce or keep having affairs, do whatever you want. Michelle quickly gathered her things and headed for the front door. Stunned, I handed William the divorce papers. Don't mess with me. Why should I stay with you when I earn more? Expect a call from my lawyer tomorrow. We'll decide the compensation amount for your verbal abuse through him.
Hey, don't decide things on your own.
Leave my stuff here until the movers come to pick it up. If you throw anything away, I'll sue. I firmly declared and then left the room.
Hey, you're joking, right?
With a smirk, I silently turned away from William, who tried to stop me, and left our home. William resisted the divorce, but after being advised by a lawyer that going to court would cost more, he reluctantly agreed. The abusive language I had recorded on my phone served as evidence, and William had to pay me compensation. Moreover, he also had to compensate for spending over $10,000 from our shared savings, which seemed to drain his account. It became known at his company that we had divorced. To make matters worse, a colleague who accompanied him to the nightclub spilled the beans about the cause of our divorce, and rumors spread that he had gotten his mistress pregnant and even that he had been physically abusive to me. His boss, who made a speech at our wedding, was furious at the embarrassment and rescinded William's promotion, transferring him to the countryside instead. William sold our house and is moving to a remote area soon. According to neighbors, Michelle truly cut ties with William, tired of his insincerity. A friend said they recently saw William at the train station and were shocked by his pale, thin appearance. William, who had always relied on me for housework, must be struggling both mentally and at work, unable to rely on his mother and facing a tough environment at his office. I imagine his colleagues at the new subsidiary would know why he was transferred, and he'd be seen with skepticism. As for his mistress, after learning William's true position from a colleague, she quickly dumped him. He got what he deserved. After the divorce, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders and realized just how much I had endured. Despite my efforts, he never recognized them and always demanded more, treating me like a maid. I felt guilty about divorcing because my boss had introduced us. It seemed like I wasn't patient enough if I quickly wanted a divorce. I hoped one day he'd understand. But I had gotten used to suppressing my own feelings, thinking that way. Now that I'm single again, I feel free and refreshed. The urgency I felt to get married, have children, or not be alone in my old age has faded after the failed marriage. For now, I'm going to take a break from dating and enjoy my single life.